What better thing could you find than to find that perhaps, a saint had risen from these ashes?
I think Mychal Judge was maybe the greatest priest ever lived. I think the cardinal was very jealous.
Mychal once said to me, he says, I'm straight and I'm gay. Does that mean he's bisexual? I don't know.
He was a pillar of strength, a pillar of love and faith. He stood tall, as tall as those twin towers that day.
Breaking news now on 1010 Wins.
This just into our newsroom. A plane has crashed into the World Trade Center. Let's get this live update from 1010 Wins correspondent Joe.
It was complete chaos. Everybody running every which way, everybody screaming, trying to get out. We went into the building, and every piece of glass was broken. There was sprinklers going off, alarm sounding.
That you thought couldn't get any worse, getting progressively worse.
Yes.
A second crashing into the second tower of the World Trade Center.
Unbelievable.
The first plane hit Tower 1, which is the North Tower. I was in the building when the second plane hit.
And all of this, the world...
Oh, wait. Oh, my God. Oh, my God, the building fell. Are you there? The building just fell.
Which building?
Oh, my God, the south building just crumbled from the top. Oh, my God, the building just fell. The entire World Trade Center on the south building just fell.
Everything went completely dark. And I remember tripping that somebody was on the floor. One of the firemen had a flashlight, and he said, "Oh my God, it's Father Judge." He said he's dead.
I noticed these emergency workers carrying this man down in a chair. I raised my camera. I had about 3 or 4 frames, and I knew that I had an image that was very important to this story.
Out of all the stories that came out of that day, the most transcendent was the story of Father Mychal Judge, the fire department chaplain, who, with his fellow firefighters, ran into the buildings at a time when everyone else was running out, who was there, not because he had to be there, but he was there to be with his men, to give them comfort, to give them any kind of aid they needed on this horrible day. And he was recorded as officially the first death at the World Trade Center, because he was the first body to be physically taken out intact from the scene.
And you wonder when my last half hour is going to be, when my last hour, what will it be? Will it be doing something for someone, trying to save a life?
This is one of the few jobs where religion is part of it. You have life and death situations, and because of that, the guys are always turning to your spiritual leader, which was Father Mike for many, many years.
But the World Trade Center went down, so did one of the tallest people in the world. Just a great friend, right? Gone.
One of our friars was walking down 6th Avenue and actually saw the airplane go overhead at a low altitude. Then, a little further, he saw smoke coming from one of the trade towers. He ran into the friary, it was Brian Carroll. He ran into Mychal Judge's room, And he says, Mychal, I think they're going to need you. I think the World Trade Towers is on fire. So he jumped up, got his uniform on, and I have to say this in case you really think he's perfect. He did take time to comb and spray his hair.
One day I got a phone call from a woman who asked if I would mind taking some pictures of a friend of hers who was the New York City Fire Department chaplain. He came in, was a great talker, started right away with anecdotes and laughing. I think he might have been a little nervous to get his picture taken. I tried to put him at ease, and I basically just set him up right back there against that backdrop and did a series of photographs of him. I went to visit him to bring him the photographs when they were ready. Personally, I love it when people live the way they say they should live. And he had all the trappings of a Franciscan monk, but I wasn't really sure what that meant until I walked into his room and realized this is what it means, because it was a very small, spare room, virtually nothing in it but a sofa bed, a telephone, a writing desk. I laid out some contact sheets and test prints on the floor. And I guess in true Mychal Judge fashion, the pictures that he picked out were just the ones that I liked because they were these wry, kind of amusing expressions, nothing serious. He wasn't interested in a serious looking picture. While I was there, his phone never stopped ringing. And the most amazing thing to me was that he never once tried to pick it up. Mychal, this is so-and-so, would you possibly be able to come, and officiate at our wedding next, Sunday afternoon? And he just looked at me, he said, I'm so in demand all the time, I just don't know. I hate to say no, but sometimes I just have to.
Here in Brooklyn, a little bit after 8:45, and then around 10 after 9, the second explosion. It rocked the whole area. My windows in my apartment building rattled.
Steve, I'm going to interrupt you because we're being pressed into public service here. The New York City Fire Department is issuing a call for a total recall of all officers and firefighters. You should all report to your companies. Again, if you are a New York City firefighter, drop what you're doing, report to your company. A major disaster is occurring in New York City this morning. As to how this happened, well, the FBI...
As a young boy, Mychal Judge wanted to be a firefighter or a priest. And he thought it was absolutely remarkable that God granted him his two dreams.
Captain John Drennan was pulled from a burning New York City apartment on March 28th. 2 other firefighters were killed by the blaze. Captain Drennan struggled 40 days to live. His death ended a career honored 3 times for valor.
A fire chief came to my door and asked me to come with him to the burn unit because my husband had been burned. And I knew it was bad because usually when they're hurt, they'll call you from the hospital. And this time he didn't call. It was that night that in the hallway of the hospital there was this friar in a brown robe and sandals, and he came over to me and said, I'm Father Mychal Judge, the fire department chaplain. And I said, I'm not Catholic, I'm Lutheran. And he immediately said, oh, I love Lutherans. My husband struggled to live for another 40 days. The best nurses struggled to keep my husband alive. And I like to believe I had the best fire department chaplain that there ever could be standing by my side.
The cardinal calls up and very graciously says, I'd like to offer you St. Patrick's Cathedral. And she says, oh, good, and Father Mike can say the Mass. Whereas someone who wasn't Lutheran might have thought, well, maybe the cardinal has in mind presiding.
10, 15 minutes later, Bina, you arrived on the scene. beautiful smile on your face. I've never seen it any other way.
If you could hear this huge cathedral, all the pomp and glory of the Holy Roman Catholic Church, and Mychal Judge's words made you feel like you're in a little tiny church in New England.
And you leaned over and you said, "Oh, John Drennan, you're wonderful, and I love you so much. And you're big and you're strong, and you're going to make it."
That probably would have rankled the Cardinal anyway, but then for Mychal to then be that brilliant, I think it was probably pretty hard for the Cardinal to understand. Mychal spoke directly to the Almighty, and when he prayed, he spoke directly to him. And I think that Mychal felt that that's where he got his orders from.
Mychal grew up in Dean Street in downtown Brooklyn, not too far from the Brooklyn Bridge, and one of his favorite walks was to cross the Brooklyn Bridge. Despite the fact that he was surrounded by hundreds of people, it was a walk that he could make in quiet and kind of renew himself.
He would walk from 31st Street, walk all the way downtown, and walk all the way over the Brooklyn Bridge, and continue all the way to Coney Island, have an ice cream, and walk all the way back and back over the bridge. But the moment he loved most was walking on that bridge. The act of spanning, of bridging, to him that was really at the core of his religion, his faith. And be it the priest bridging to the parishioner or bridging to people of other faiths, it was all that bridging was really what he was about.
Mychal used to talk a lot about his Irish roots and the fact that his family emigrated from Ireland, I think in maybe the late 20s or 30s.
His parents met on the boat coming over, and they were married at St. Michael's Church in Brooklyn, and they settled down, and I think all would have been well if his father hadn't fallen ill.
They became poorer as a result of his father's very untimely early death. And I think that left a real scar on Mychal and a sort of an indelible identity with the underclass and the great unwashed.
They had some struggles sometimes. Academically, he wasn't the greatest student, and he wasn't all that disciplined. He was more the type of person who wanted to get out there and be with the folks rather than spend the time studying.
He believed very devoutly in the sort of God-given goodness of people just by their being human. And he never, ever saw himself as better than, or indeed as less than others.
Mychal Judge was as comfortable with the most powerful people, from President Clinton, from Mayor Giuliani, and he didn't differentiate. When he talked to President and Mrs. Clinton, it was the same generosity of spirit that he shared with all of us regular people.
Your Eminence, members of Father Mike's family, especially.
Bill Clinton and Hillary and their daughter Chelsea were among the many dignitaries in the congregation. And at the end of Mass, she was invited to say a few words.
My husband and I first heard of Father Mike during the White House years. We kept hearing about this charismatic Franciscan.
She gave a beautiful eulogy at his funeral He encouraged her, he encouraged women, he encouraged the president during the darkest days of the presidency when all the scandals were foisted on him. He was invited to a prayer breakfast at the White House during that difficult time for the Clintons. He was able to minister to their needs.
What a beacon of light. He lit up the White House as he lit up every place he ever found himself.
And we all smiled and looked at each other because Father Mychal Judge couldn't even change a light bulb by himself.
He found New York a city that was alive, as he said. It's alive. Any time of the day, any time of the night you were there, it was alive. You didn't know sometimes whether it was day or night. There was always things going on. There was always interesting things. It's cosmopolitan. Hundreds of different people, and he just was energized by it.
When you come from a poor background and you get ahead in life, you still keep a part of that with you. And you can just sometimes walk the street and see the struggling nature of the poor. And I think Mychal saw that all the time, especially in a city like New York.
There was a guy lying on the street. It was about 90-some degrees. He was wearing 3 coats and a pair of pants with no fly and no shoes. And I took a dollar bill and I folded it long ways the way Father Mychal did. It makes it seem less like a handout that way, just kind of giving it to somebody. And made eye contact like he said you should. And I said, "This is from Father Mychal Judge." And the guy rose from the sidewalk and said, "Father Mychal Judge was my spiritual advisor." And he walked down the street, stuck the dollar in a poor box, and continued off on his way. And I said, "I guess he was."
You had a city that had been struck by this devastating attack. What better thing could you find from this horrible event than to find that perhaps, you know, a saint had risen from these ashes? Here was this spiritual moment in the middle of this horrible disaster. This photo of Mychal Judge on a chair being carried out by some fellow victims of the World Trade Center disaster. People will remember that picture because there was God in the middle of that hell. When I started this website, and the people that worked with me didn't make this up. We didn't decide, hey, let's cause some trouble here. No, this was out here. We just pulled everything together and gave it a clearinghouse. We're saying that here's a pretty good candidate for sainthood. People are confronting their prejudices. You know, what is a saint? People are thrashing that out on stmychal.com as we speak right now.
There are 2 quite separate sort of criteria. One is martyrdom, dying for the faith. They have to die for the faith. So in a sense, Father Judge is not a martyr, which of course is much easier to be made a saint if you're a martyr. But he isn't a martyr because he didn't die for the faith. He died fulfilling his job, but he didn't die on account of his Catholicism. The more difficult way is if you're, the other sort of saint is called a confessor. The word confessor is used of people who die after living a life of heroic Christian virtue. And that, of course, is much more difficult to prove. One of the things the Catholic Church, that Rome certainly won't tolerate, is any deviance from Catholic doctrine in its strictest form.
What a lot of good Catholics, what a lot of ordinary people are saying to us, so what if Mychal Judge is canonized or not? He's already a saint in our eyes.
I was a younger police officer. Patty and I had been married a very short time. We were expecting our first child. A little after 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I was questioning this young man and his friends, and I took my eye off of them, and 15-year-old teenager shot me several times and left me for dead. The bullet that struck my throat pierced my spine and left me paralyzed from the neck down. I was surrounded by many people who were supporting me and loving me, and one of those people was Father Mychal Judge. Almost to his death, he was always there for us.
I remember before giving birth to Connor, he was very helpful in trying to help me understand about different things and the importance of what marriage is all about. It's not just when you take those vows, it's in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health, till death do you part. And I never realized how important those vows were until this happened.
Father Mike not only gave him reason to live and gave him meaning in his life, but he also taught him and got Steve McDonald to actually forgive that kid who shot him.
On more than one occasion, he'd simply say, Father Mike, I had to forgive the man. I have enough without carrying the luggage of unforgiveness. He said, I just can't carry that luggage. So I forgave him and I'm free.
See, I could have taken the moment to say, I want to see this kid go away for a very long time. Or Patty Ann could have said, I want him to suffer the way Stephen suffers. He was inspiring us and those around us to think differently about this, that there was a better way to respond to this terrible act of violence than with more violence.
There was nothing in Mychal Judge's life that didn't emulate the loving peace that passes all understanding. I mean, just that phrase alone, the peace that passes understanding. That's what we as Christians have to work toward, not deciding like we hate this person and we have to do this and weapons and this and that. This nation is so polarized now. No matter what party you're in, we think the other one is evil. It's not true. And this is not what Mychal Judge's life was about.
I think he came to Connolly's basically let his hair down. And Mychal was the kind of a guy who liked to be in a crowd. He liked a circle. He liked a buzz around him. And he would be there, getting into the music. And he appreciated Black 47, I think because, we were rebels, and he was a bit of a rebel in the soul himself. He liked to be amongst that, and for the controversial songs, he would move up to the front. He was a cool guy. We'd come off stage, and your hair is all over the place, you're sweating, and most of the people around you are sweating from having danced, and there would be Mychal, totally prim and proper almost, and it was a shine off him, I always thought. Not an angelic shine, but he scrubbed himself, and everything had to be just so with him. And I find it really endearing, because the rest of us are just shaggy dogs getting off, and there would be this guy, he was great. I didn't know a lot of things about Mychal. You know, I didn't actually know that he didn't drink because he stood by the bar, and that's where drinkers drink, you know, stand.
I remember one time walking home from work on 34th Street, and next thing you know, somebody's walking next to me. Well, it's Mychal. I said, Mychal, where you going? I said, come on up for a few minutes. No, he said, I'm off to an AA meeting. Gotta be there, you know, but I'll speak to you soon, I'll call you.
We'd all gather in the rec room about 10 o'clock at night, and we would, you know, I'd have soda, and he would have a little can of tab, stuff like that. But what he told me he would do is he'd open it, go in the sink and pour it down the sink and put liquor in it, and then go into the rec room, so we would think he'd be drinking soda and he would be drinking that.
Mychal was a confessed alcoholic, and eventually he pulled himself out of that and became a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. By going to these AA meetings and being with fellow alcoholics, he would re-energize his batteries, and he'd be ready to get back out there the next few days, the next few months, and do the work that he thought, you know, God meant him to do.
It turned out to be a great, great asset to his ministry, because then he understood, and that he helped so many hundreds and hundreds of people face their problem of alcoholism. So, you know, it was like the story of the wounded healer. You know, what was seen as maybe a fault turned into be a great victory for not only himself, but everyone that he helps.
He was able to use that empathy with people who were the outcasts, and empathize with them by saying, I'm just like you. Back in the early 80s, when Catholic Church and a lot of people closed their doors on AIDS patients, Mychal Judge was one of the first to go on his own and bathe these people and care for them, and not be afraid to hold them and help them die.
It was a time of plague. It was a time when we didn't know how you could contract AIDS. I mean, some people thought you'd get it from just sitting on a toilet seat, that somebody with the virus, or that you drink out of the same glass. And people were basically living in complete and utter fear.
I remember him and I talking about, you know, seeing the bodies just so racked up and so thin and so frail. And what Mychal would do is massage the feet. He'd get some hand cream, and he would massage a person's with AIDS feet. And he said they would love it. You know, it was the greatest thing. He did it for Stephen too, I remember. When I became partners with Stephen, what happened was that's when the opportunistic infections that come with AIDS began to creep into our lives. Through the summer, Stephen's condition worsened in '89. He began to get more weak. More friends of his had died, including a former lover. You know, Stephen always felt better after spending time with Mychal. Like I said, even if it was just on the telephone. So we put him into the hospital, and of course, as I said, that was in autumn of '89, and eventually he never came out. I think it was in '86, there was a famous Halloween letter written by Cardinal Ratzinger, in which he called homosexuals morally intrinsically evil.
The New York Archdiocese basically issued a decree saying that any priest who would minister to the Catholic, lesbian, gay, transgendered community or celebrate Mass for them would be suspended. It was the height of the pandemic of AIDS. We couldn't find churches or synagogues or funeral homes to take the bodies initially. They were literally carted in these body bags from hospitals to crematoriums.
Mychal was one of the few priests who would do our funerals. And we would hold those funerals in the lower church of St. Francis of Assisi, thanks to Mychal. In fact, we held Stephen's funeral in the lower church at St. Francis of Assisi.
He didn't get into trouble, I think, for two reasons. One was he was protected by his own order. And the second was Mychal was no gay activist. He was not as publicly out there in any of these areas politically as I was. He realized that within these enormous institutions, like the Catholic Church, one can do great good. But it is at a very high price. And I think Mychal's price was getting too much.
Soon after September 11th, when the grief and the loss was still so raw, so many of us were so offended that so-called friends of his decided to say Mychal Judge was a gay man. Sexuality never came up. Maybe it's just my generation, but you know, I didn't know if he was indeed, or if they were just trying to claim him as a champion.
Mychal was like a murderer, the way I see him now, that he was so into what you were saying that you took from him what you wanted at that point, and he could relate perfectly to anyone. So I think that's where the great confusion about what type of a character Mychal was, because he was whatever you wanted him to be, because he's very empathetic.
Because so many people loved Mychal and felt that he was their priest, they were so devastated by his death that when it happened, they wanted to somehow express that, or to keep his spirit living, because they miss it so much. So all these little groups sprung up. For instance, Mychal's Message.
Well, when we were children growing up, my father used to tell us when he would bring us to New York to see Father Mychal, or Father Mychal would, you know, send us a note or a card, or he'd call, he'd say, someday that man is going to become a saint.
So now we have this family in Lancaster that's gathering all these things that the needy people need, like socks and blankets, and they take collections. They come down here to St. Francis Inn to help the people that he helped. So they're continuing making Mychal's Message a reality.
When I really knew him, I was really young. But the one thing I do remember is like his love for me and my mom and my whole family, and how much he cared for us.
My life was changed because I knew him. I don't know how we could have survived the transplant without him in our lives. Well, when Shannon was born, her skin got yellow and she developed a liver disease. I was told that she would die if she didn't get a liver transplant. We called Father Mychal right away, and he just reminded us that we shouldn't be worrying about tomorrow, that God was going to guide us. He was going to give us everything we needed and send the people that we needed to get us through. And he prayed for that with us and really helped us to just let go. She was 7 months old when she had her transplant, and she received a third of my liver. It was a living donor liver transplant. And I believe that Shannon is as healthy as she is today because of The way he prayed for her when he was alive and the way he's praying for her now. I really believe it.
In order to become a saint, you need to perhaps have 2 proven miracles. Well, we have their names, we have their email addresses, we have their address. You want to talk to them? Go right ahead. I think one of the problems in America, in the Catholic Church here, is that we look at saints as, plaster statues, as pictures on the wall. To think that old Father Mike was a saint?
A miracle is usually taken to be a cure, though it doesn't necessarily have to be a cure. In a sense, God has suspended cures, that is, that someone has suddenly become better when it seemed impossible that this should be the case.
I was watching CNN, like I did every morning to catch the first news of the day. I saw the second tower, and I just went to my knees. They kept talking about this heroic priest that was in the firefighters department as well. And the more they talked about him, like I said, I was glued and just fixated I wanted to know more about him. And when they showed his picture being carried out, it was probably the worst part of the attack for me. I kept thinking, how can I possibly bring a child into this world under these conditions? And more, he wasn't in New York. He was sitting by me. He was, and again, it's not voices, in my head or anything. It was just someone there that kept saying, it'll be okay. And I didn't know what was going to go wrong. I had no clue what was going to go wrong with my pregnancy or the fact that Michael would have Down syndrome and have, heart surgery. It was getting this message, it's okay. I'm going to be there. It's all going to be okay. He had 2 holes in his heart. One, they surgically ligated, they fixed. The second one would have required a major heart surgery. And they told me that there's really very little chance of that closing on its own. And it's a very risky surgery on any age, but especially on a child that's a couple weeks old. I prayed very hard, and after just about 2 years, the cardiologist said that the hole had completely closed, and they were amazed, absolutely amazed, because it was over 5 millimeters, and that tends not to close without major surgery. I look at my little boy, and I really don't know that he would be here. Actually, I'm almost sure he wouldn't be here if it hadn't been for Father Judge's hand in our lives. And that to me is a miracle.
Of all the other victims and those who survived that day, there was just something about that picture. Some of the other firefighters I work with have children about the same age, and we would all share stories of what trouble or mischief our children got into. And my son didn't seem to be talking like the other children. I thought perhaps he might have been deaf. I at one time, to prove my point that there was a problem, I banged 2 pans behind him without him knowing it, and there was no reaction at all. And we talked to our pediatrician, and he said at age 24 months, 2 years, a child should have between 30 words and 200 words of vocabulary that he uses regularly. And our son had about 2. This one night, he had fallen asleep, and I was still praying with him and for him. And I heard a voice that said, "Don't forget to add Father Mychal Judge to your prayers. Pray to him, and it will be all right." Then maybe about a week of that, I got another message, and it said that I needed to have Matthew anointed.
So we had him anointed, and then when it was done, he went in his room and he was quiet.
The next morning, we woke up to the sounds of him babbling in his crib. Now, he was always silent, except for grunting. And the kid was babbling as if he was singing.
Daddy.
How do you spell daddy?
I spelled it the name already.
Write it down for me. Just because we had him anointed didn't mean that I stopped praying for him. But the difference seemed to come as soon as I added my Father Judge to the prayers to ask him to pray for my son.
These are not people who say, I saw Elvis at the 7-Eleven, I didn't see a UFO. No, I live my life. I have been struck with a tragedy, and this happened, and I can't explain it. I guess it was a miracle.
What's that letter?
A.
Oh. What's that?
X.
What's that spell?
Max.
That's not your name. Your name's not Max. Is his name Max?
Just kidding.
He's a normal, typical
rambunctious. No, we can't get him to be quiet.
We have verifiable instances here that you can find out, was this a miracle or not? You know, we're not saying anybody's a saint here, but we're saying that here's a pretty good candidate for sainthood, Mychal Judge.
Well, it's a funny story. I guess it was in October, November of 1999. My sister-in-law had this wonderful artist. I had never painted before. She got me to come to the class, and it was a very nerve-wracking experience, but very beneficial and very rewarding. Why did I stop painting at my age? I just felt like it was something I was meant to do. I've only been painting a few years, so when I took this particular painting on, there's a lot of people in it, and I didn't know if I would have the ability to do 6 people in one painting, and that in itself is what's called ambitious. And actually it flowed. It was probably one of the quicker paintings that I've ever gotten finished, because I think it was such a dedication and such a strong feeling, emotional feeling of doing this painting that guided my brush, and I think God held it. Every time people see it, they seem to get overwhelmed and relive it and get goosebumps from it, and still does that to me.
We entered going into the building. Everybody was running out, as you can well imagine. And I remember distinctly thinking that, you know, that's going to be my last breath that I take. We put him in a chair. We carried him down the steps.
I made it to the base of the remaining tower, and I noticed these emergency workers carrying this man down in a chair. I raised my camera and I started shooting, and one of the firemen started yelling at me to stop, and you know, I knew that I had to keep shooting. Working for a wire service, you know that you really need to get these photographs out as soon as possible. So I made it out of the rubble, made it up here to Times Square and to the Reuters building, and got it out within minutes, and the picture was worldwide.
There's something about their faces, kind of the people carrying them, their determination and their shock, which I think mirrored the shock of anybody who saw what happened that day. I mean, you could look at their faces and you could say to yourself, that's how I feel. That's how I feel. And I think when you go from their faces, when they're shock and horror at what happened, and then you see this kind of oddly peaceful figure, and then when you find out what a good man this was, I think it was the first sense that goodness could respond to evil, even when evil's that enormous.
Vengeance was not part of his life. It was not part of his vocabulary. I can only infer that Mychal Judge would have felt the same way about what's going on in the Middle East now. That this nation seems to have lost its soul in our hatred at lashing out is not a very Christian thing to do. Mychal Judge would be appalled.
We had a great friend. His name was Father Mychal Judge. He used to come see us in Connolly's. He was a chaplain of the fire department in New York City. He went out in 9/11, didn't come back. This is for Mychal.
When I went to do the album, that was the first song that I wrote. And in a certain way, it was trying to symbolize New York through Mychal.
City streets are full of woe. I saw suffering wherever I go.
So at Mychal, I'm trying to show him in that early morning, 5 o'clock, when he would first have woken up and he's getting ready for the day, but he's just lying there, and in a certain way he's thinking about his life. And he's about to set out and go forward on 9/11.
As I rise on the September morn, the sun is beaming down, the streets are warm. God's in his heaven, and all is well. I will go forth and do his will.